Space Marine bikes. Bikes for Space Marines. An iconic unit from the earliest days of 40k. Originally in metal, but chiefly in plastic since 1996. In this video, I'll be doing an eBay rescue on some rather war-torn bikes and restoring them to battlefield-worthy status. Before we start the video proper, I want to thank Max from the YouTube channel Lizard of Doom for asking me to take part in his challenge project on the theme of eBay rescues. Some other creators are involved too, and there's links and whatnot about those in the video description. Do go and have a look. But anyway, allow me to take you back in time to 1996. I was actually falling out of love with Warhammer 40k, trading my hobby time for PC gaming. I know, heresy, but peer pressure is sometimes difficult to resist. But reading my codex, I realised I still had a soft spot for Space Marine bikes, and when they got a new sculpt, I had to ask Father Christmas for the box set. This boxed set. I built the set in no time, but with my interest in 40k waning, it took me another year and a bit to paint them. I mean, that was just my childhood, a toing and froing between Warhammer and video gaming, except for when I combined both of them in Final Liberation. Anyway, I ended up painting them black, Ravenwing, since I owned the Angels of Death Codex, and the Ravenwing had a special rule which made them harder to hit if they were shot at. I played with these in 2nd and 3rd edition 40k, and I remember my friend converted the Sergeant's base, so he was doing a wheelie. The set came with 3 plastic bikes and 3 metal torsos. You could make them as standard bikers if you liked, using this plastic torso and both arms, just like the box set which came with 1 bike. But the metal torsos were far superior and allowed you to give them snazzy war gear such as a power sword on the Sergeant, or a plasma gun or melter gun. Using these metal parts would mean you'd have the plastic torsos as bits for your bits box, and of course, a spare handlebar holding armor piece. I remember using such a torso as a guy popping out of the top hatch on a Rhino. Of course, the modular aspect of this kit meant you could chop your favourite character mini at the waist and stick them on a bike if you so desired, which is useful since taking a bike was an option for captains, chaplains, librarians, apothecaries, tech marines and standard bearers. This allows the Tech Marine bike graviton gun combo, which I expect would be hilarious to play with, and horrible to be on the receiving end of. If my sources are accurate, such a combo was banned at many a store. My box was trashed long ago, but I recently got this off eBay. I don't have many original 2nd edition boxes, but this was a keeper, even if it does show its wear. As well as the models, it contained flag stickers to boot, 3 of each of the 4 kinds, for the most popular Space Marine chapters at the time. The box also came with 3 rectangular cavalry bases, which was strange because we tend to think these were more at home in Warhammer Fantasy. Then again, Ogryns came with square bases, as did many demons, though the latter were common to both Warhammer games. Anyway, you could use these rectangular bases, or not. In fact, official images sometimes had no base at all. The bike fitted with a small stand below the footplate to keep the thing upright. I like this flexibility. It reminds me of another time. You know, your hobby, your way. Base or no base, it doesn't really matter. So what came in this scruffy box when I purchased it? Well, along with the Predator I saved at the end of last year, I got these bikes. Caked in paint, but salvageable. So now seemed like as good a time as any to save them from their plight. I say plight, that's a bit harsh I suppose. I wouldn't have painted them any better than this when I was a teenager and collecting Blood Angels. But I need these for a different chapter now, so it's the Emperor's cleansing for them. After a good old bath in Biostrip and a scrub-a-dub-dub, it was time to reassemble these relics. I say relics, but until the Space Marine bikes were retired not so long ago, these bikes remained mostly unchanged over the course of about 27 years if my calculations are correct. So, I'm going to demonstrate how I assembled one bike, but I followed the same process on all three. Reassembling them began with these two chassis halves. There's a nice push-fit element to slot the wheels onto before gluing the chassis together. A feature I liked back in the day since it meant my wheels could rotate, like on a Hot Wheels car for instance. But this is no toy, as GW have said in their old catalogues, so I will be gluing their wheels in place, which also stops them spinning around annoyingly while I'm trying to paint them. After I glue the chassis together with polycement, the footplate goes on the bottom and helps hold the model together. I like this design. Where the handlebars attached to the main body, there were some knobbly bits which needed to be filed down before securing them with superglue. I noticed there was a gap at the rear, so I filled this in with milliput and a moist finger rub. For the front plate, a new model would have had slots to help affix it to the chassis, but these had snapped, so I pinned these instead using small lengths of paperclip. I considered pinning the legs also, but decided it probably wasn't necessary. I know the last rear pinning event caused discomfort for some viewers. Part assembly seemed wise here, so I decided to sit the legs onto the bike rather than glue them. My thinking here was I could position the arms correctly so they could reach the handles and not overreach them. There was a Goldilocks zone for this arm positioning. With torso and arms positioned, the arms were glued to the torso and the torso to the legs. I found there was a little gap filling to do, for which I used milliput, smoothed in place with water and an old brush. When it came to the bases, I chose the rectangular cavalry bases more commonly associated with fantasy. It's what I used back in the day, and it's also used in my source material. We'll return to that later. But the two slits needed to go, so these were covered up with some thin card superglued on. Then I brushed on some PVA and sprinkled on some of my bespoke basing mix and allowed that to dry before fixing it all with another layer of diluted PVA. And here's the parts ready to paint in sub-assemblies. I kept the riders off for now, so I could better reach areas that would be obscured when they are glued to the bike. As you can see, I primed the components white and glued them onto temporary paint handles. Of course, with this in the assembly, a lot of superglue was expended, and in a moment of laxity, I didn't notice a leak in my superglue tube while it was resting on my cutting mat, which resulted in the tube sticking fast to the mat. Gutted. 'Twas a new tube as well. Never mind. It still dispensed glue while being stuck to the mat. You may think of bikes as being a special kind of infantry unit with greater movement and higher toughness. This was true from 3rd edition onwards, but in 2nd edition, bikes were vehicles with their own quirks and nuances. As a squadron, they had to remain in coherency, which was 6 inches rather than the usual 2 inches for infantry. Like with other wheeled and tracked vehicles, bikes had 3 speeds: slow speed, combat speed, and fast speed. Other vehicles had to accelerate up 1 pip at a time, like going through gears on a car for instance. But bikes could skip combat speed and go from slow to fast speed in 1 turn, though they did have to decelerate just like other vehicles. At slow speeds, bikes could make as many turns as they wished. However, at combat, they could only turn twice, with each turn being up to 45 degrees, and at fast speed, they could only make 1 such turn. Bikes could attempt special skid turns of an additional 45 degrees regardless of speed. There was no cap on how many of these a player could do with a bike in a single turn, but for each skid test, a d6 would have to be rolled. A roll of 4+ at combat speed would mean a success, with a roll of 5+ required for the same outcome at fast speeds. But rolling less than these targets could have lethal consequences depending on speed. Rolling a 2 or a 3 at combat speed, or rolling a 4 or a 5 at fast speed, means the skid works, but the driver can't fire his weapon due to preoccupation with staying balanced. Passengers could fire though. Rolling a 1 at combat speed, or a 2 at fast speed, was the same as before, but the passengers couldn't shoot either. If a 1 was rolled while at fast speed, then the bike crashes and is destroyed, together with its rider. The flaming wreck travels straight forward for the remainder of its maximum fast move, and then explodes with an area radius of 1 inch, causing a strength 4 hit on any target within the effect area. If the bike hits something before its move is complete, work out normal collision damage, and then the bike explodes. Riders were allowed to dismount bikes, which I suppose was more useful for characters who just wanted to hoof it into close combat. Of course, they could mount them as well, if within 2 inches. The rules don't make it terribly clear, but I presume one could only mount their own bike and not run off with somebody else's.
Oi, thief!
And I'm not sure how representing the bike and rider as separate models could be easily resolved in-game, without using multiple models. Suggestions welcome. Dismounting at a speed of 10 inches or less incurred no penalty. But at speeds above that, automatic, potentially deadly hits were sustained, as per this table. Riders and passengers can shoot 1 weapon each in the shooting phase, whether this be a pistol, or basic weapon, or mounted weapon for instance. Mounted weapons had a fixed firing arc, but handheld weapons could be fired in any direction. Hit and run attacks allowed riders or passengers to make a single close combat attack as they drove by an enemy model. Unlike other close combat attacks, it's resolved in the movement phase. Both the attacker and the attackee roll exactly 1d6, though the attacker on bike counts as charging and having a higher initiative. Otherwise, the melee is resolved as normal, except no parries can be made. In doing this, the rider or passenger, whoever attacked, cannot shoot this turn. Rules also exist for collisions, but with bikes being flimsy, they would only damage the location they struck rather than all locations. I concede, this is a rather brief description, but it's a complex rule set, and I don't want this video to be too long. Here's a quick slideshow of screen caps if you want to read it yourself. So you're probably expecting me to paint these as Ultramarines, given past projects, but I'm going to be painting them Imperial Fists, for reasons you'll discover in time. Let's just say it's a bucket list thing. But let me be honest, even though I have some experience painting yellow, I approached this project with trepidation. With my Lamenter's army, it was Avalanche Sunset all the way, and since I wanted them war-torn, mistakes could be easily turned into battle damage. But I wanted this scheme to be more vibrant, more saturated, and closer to the yellows featured in the old Codex Ultramarines. Warmer, crisper. An internet search yielded no lack of tutorials, many using inks and airbrushes and pre-shading. Off camera, I tried some of these, of course with just a normal brush, something, as you know, I am no stranger to. I am a stranger to the airbrush, however, and with a deadline this time, I couldn't afford to start learning. So what you see here is not a tutorial for effective yellow, it's just my journey of reasonable compromise. I know there's better methods, it's just what I settled on with the resources, time and skills at my disposal, and I carried out the same steps on each of the 3 models, even though you will only see me paint 1 here. I started with a white prime and painted on a couple of thin coats of Citadel Avalanche Sunset, mixed with a dot of Vallejo Dark Sand. This is my yellow base coat, which admittedly looks pale for now, but bear with me, dear viewer. All the main armor panels got this treatment, and I left all the areas that would be black, red or metallic. I left them looking white. The same can be said for the rider. By the way, I glued him with superglue to a 25mm base before painting. I need something to interface between the model and the painting handle, and a little superglue in the right place allows me to snap off the model later. The next yellow is Citadel Contrast Imperial Fist, which goes on evenly over all the places painted yellow in the previous step.
But it's just egg yolk.
If there was an excess on the flat areas, I removed those with another brush. Again, this was also done with the riders. Some contrast is meant to pool in the recesses. I mean, that's the point, I suppose, to allow for easy shading. But I guess I was using this here just because it was a smooth and vibrant paint that went on easily. Instead, I wanted to make my own shade, which I achieved by mixing Vallejo Orange Red with Flow Improver. Using a small brush, I carefully paint this into the recesses on the yellow armour, on the bike and on the rider. I feel the low viscosity of the mix helps it settle into the crevices, and I have found that such mixes are a reasonable alternative should you lack the correct colour of branded wash paint. I aimed for control here, rather than sloshing it everywhere. When that was dry, it was time for some highlights. I used Dark Sand by Vallejo, thinning it with water, and painting a sharp line on the edges of the armour panels. It was time-consuming and required patience, but you get faster with practice, and it was necessary to achieve the outcome I wanted. And here's what the bike looks like at this stage. Notice that at the foot of the base plate, I added more of the orange wash, in a sort of gradient. I felt the yellow was done at this stage. Was it perfect? By no means, but good enough for my taste. The next part was to base coat everything black that would be metallic or black. On the bike, this means the bolters, the wheels, the exhausts, and the trims around the front plate and the wheel guards, to name a few places. I used Vallejo black in a few thin coats, but it was necessary to take my time here so as to not ruin the yellow. To that end, I didn't thin the paint excessively, since such an enterprise would increase the risk of splattering. And here's how the bike looks after this step. If this model follows the template of some real-life motorbikes, then this is the fuel tank. Whatever it is, it got 2 thin coats of Vallejo Dark Vermilion, in keeping with the source pictures I was following. And while this vermilion was fresh on my palette, I painted the pauldron trims and the Aquila on the rider the same colour. As they say, blood on your chest, blood on your hands, and this lad is no stranger to violence. Probably. Yeah, they don't actually say that, do they? Now, I could be a bit old school here, but whenever I paint sections of a model gun metal, I tend to base coat them black as I did here with the melter gun, or on the backpack, including the vents, and the under armour and any exposed cables. It means the recesses can be left black, while I use the minimum volume of metallic paint in the necessary places, plus the furniture of the melter gun will stay black anyway. To cleanse my palette of fine brushwork, I decided to have a go at the bases, which I primed yellow. And yes, I know I could have primed the whole bike and rider yellow, but that hadn't occurred to me until much later. I used this Naga green, heavily diluted, to give the first base coat. This meant some of the yellow prime showed through, which was good since it helped break up the green monotony. With a not so diluted batch of paint, I painted the rims. After a couple of coats of green, the uppermost yellow parts still showed through, but I wanted a starker highlight, so I opted for a dry brush of dark sand. The base had a couple of rocks, so I painted these dark grey and added light grey highlights until I was happy. Back to the bike, and just as on my Ultramarines Landspeeder, I painted the screen Caliban green, along with some of the buttons. The other buttons got a coat of red contrast paint, then the seat got a coat of flat brown, and some streaks of tan earth to represent cracks in the leather. Ceramite does have this effect on leather after all, and even lighter brown was sketched on to add some more cracked effect on the edges, since that's where the rider gets on and off, and he's too lazy to lift his leg as he's dismounting. Now for the next bit, I mixed black with Lotham blue to give a dark muted blue, which I painted on all the raised areas of the tyres. And this was the outcome. Next, the gunmetal was applied to the exhausts, trims, pipes, engine, hubcaps, on the wheels, and all but the furniture of the bolt guns. You might be able to spot the crosshair on the screen. I painted this off camera, since it was too fiddly to film with my current skill set. Then I went back to the tyres and highlighted the edges of the tyre treads with a light dry brush of Fenrisian grey. If you wish to take bikes in 2nd edition 40k, you would take them as a squadron of between 3 and 5 models, at 47 points apiece. As said before, in later editions where bikes were basically tougher, faster moving infantry with more guns, bikes were treated as vehicles with light armour in 2nd edition. So the profile here is for the Space Marine Rider. The bike itself had a vehicle data card. On the front is useful information pertaining to ramming, the various movement speeds, and details on the weapons. Each bike came with twin-link bolters and a targeter. Twin-linked in 2nd edition meant that only one to hit roll was made, but if a hit roll was successful, then both weapons would hit the target. The targeter on the bolters gives +1 to hit. When the bike itself is hit, there's a 2 in 6 chance the rider will be hit, and a 4 in 6 chance the bike will be hit. Hits against the rider are resolved as if it was infantry. Hits against the bike follow the rules for shooting at vehicles, and a successful penetration means unleashing exciting and flavoursome results through a roll on this table. The Ultramarines Codex entry says that any rider can take assault weapons, which is very generous when you think about it, and up to 2 can have special weapons, melters, plasmas, and flamers. They can take grenades too, and the squadron can be joined by an attack bike for 110 points. This has a separate entry, but I feel that's a whole other video. This is the paint job at this stage. I felt the time was right to detach the paint handle, pin the bottom, and slot it into a hole on the base itself. There weren't many details left on the bike, highlighting the gun furniture with Fenrisian grey and painting the bolt casings in the magazine gold. Speaking of gold, I mixed some of that with flat brown to give a more brassy colour suitable for the exhausts. Some of you may feel the need to tell me to buy such a paint, and by all means do, since it boosts engagement, but I like to use what I have rather than buy new paints if I don't need them. I use some pure gold to paint one end of the exhausts, which will have received the least weathering. On the back quarter of each exhaust, I paint some purple wash, and then blue wash when this is dry. I had some Nuln Oil remaining after my daily shot of it, so this was painted tentatively onto all the silver areas, particularly around any rivets. The very end of the exhausts was painted black to show it had been carbonised. And for the icing on the cake, I applied some decals to a gloss varnished surface. This was the easy bit, since they were going onto flat armour. Those that went on the shoulder pads of the rider were done using Microsol and Microset. And while they were doing their thing, I got to work with gunmetal again, on the backpack and the melter gun mainly, but also on the little antenna on his helmet. I wonder why these were given to bikers, for instance, and not to all Marines. Surely they all have Voxcom. Do correct me on this in the comments. Now, since I hate my life sometimes, I decided to paint over the assault decals black. I used red ones, since I have loads of these silly Dark Angels ones, and I'm not going to do anything else with them. Reichland Flesh Shade was painted into the recesses on the Aquila, and while that was drying, I highlighted the melter gun in the same way as I did the bolters. A bright silver paint was used to highlight the gunmetal areas on both the bike and the rider, paying most attention to edges and rivets. On the Aquila, I brought back some of the vibrant red with another careful coat of dark vermilion. Then, I edge highlighted the red area by mixing some orange and dark sand. Off camera, I painted the lenses of his helmet white, then Lotham blue, and finally some thinned contrast Leviathan blue to darken the edges. And that was the painting of the bike and the rider done. I snapped the riders off their bases and slotted them onto their seats. There, ready for some Instagram beauty shots. But something was missing. These models' flagpoles were not fit for purpose after the stripping process. That is, if they were even there at all. Moreover, I didn't have any Imperial fist flags. I was going to have to fashion my own. I started with some milliput to make a stand for the flagpole. I simply eyeballed the rough trapezium shape rather than use a template. While this was still soft, I pressed a short length of florist's wire into the stand. Later, I made some milliput balls and stuck these to the top of the poles. With the flagpole done, it was time for a flag. I designed these myself on my computer, using the dimensions of the other chapter's flags as a guide. And this is how they came out. I simply printed them onto regular printer paper, And oh no, I could have used X, Y, and Z instead, but I didn't, because, well, I felt like it, and it's my hobby anyway. I painted these on the paper before cutting them out so I could cut off any mistakes around the edges. I used 2 paints here, both Vallejo, Golden Yellow and Dark Vermilion. I sprayed the pole black and used a darkish grey mix on the top. And with that done, I glued them to the backs of the bikes, and voila! So there we have it, 3 Space Marine bikes, painted in Imperial Fist colours. A challenging paint scheme, but a rewarding outcome. Quite a journey, from how I found them. A sergeant with a power sword, a marine with a plasma gun, and another with a melter gun. I would have added 2 more bikes to this squadron, but time demands mean that this will have to wait. At least I have plenty spare models waiting in the wing. Why 5 bikes, you say? And why Imperial Fists? Let's just say I'm trying to fulfill a childhood dream that was never realised. But I guess that's my channel in a nutshell, right? Thanks again to Max from Lizard of Doom for including me in this challenge. I might win something apparently, but if not, it's fine. The real prize for me is the completion of another retro restoration project. So I hope you've enjoyed this jaunt. Please do stick around and see what other old Warhammer stuff I churn out if that's your shtick. And if you like what I do, please do have a look at my Instagram. And with that, Look, I am technically in competition with some other creators here, and if you know me, you know I'm more in it for the experience than the prizes. But will any of these other guys have come up with a corny song? I think we know the answer to that. 2, 3, 4. What is better than a space marine? A space marine on a bike, speeding through the ruined land, special weapon or sword in hand, twin-link bolters blaze away, hit and run will win the day, flanking strikes and fast attack, taking those objectives back. I ask you, what is better than a space marine? A space marine on a bike. What is better than a space marine? A space marine on a bike. On a bike. On a bike. Oh, maybe it's better at a faster tempo. What is better than a space marine? A space marine on a bike, speeding through the ruined land, special weapon or sword in hand, twin-link bolters blaze away, hit and run will win the day, flanking strikes and fast attack, taking those objectives back. I ask you, what is better than a space marine? A space marine on a bike, on a bike, on a bike.